Are you addicted to gold and silver? I know I am and have been for quite a long time, but the difference is I kind of know that I am. But there are a lot of people perhaps that don't. And I've got the question here. Where does the responsibility lie? Is it on you to recognise if you're buying too much of this stuff? Or is it somewhat responsibility of all those beautiful social media influencers, bullion dealers and retailers that are quite happy to cash in and take all of your money just so that you can get hold of this stuff? Hello everybody, Backyard Bullion here, and a very warm welcome to you all joining me for another precious metal ramble. Now today's ramble is going to be somewhat a word of, I hope, sobering caution against being too far down the rabbit hole of gold and silver. Shopping addiction. Gold and silver are quite addictive. I can speak from experience, and I'm quite happy to say right here on the channel, my name's Backyard Bullion and I am addicted to gold and silver. I got hooked pretty early on, and whilst it might not seem like a massive problem, oh goodness, you've bought an awful lot of gold and silver, sometimes it can come back to bite you if you had to, for example, sell everything because you've run out of money to pay those essential bills. And I've talked a lot about that in the past. But I was inspired by a radio broadcast I heard this week on gambling addiction. And it really did hit some bells with myself. Now, I've had a few bits of poker in my life that I've played, and I can certainly relate to how easy it can be when you go a little bit overboard. And fortunately in my life I never got full-blown addiction to it, but I did at one point gamble a fairly large sum of cash in a poker game and came out evens, and it scared me, and so I ran away. And it was, I think, when I look back in hindsight, something that was, I think, quite mature of me to do. But could I do that to gold and silver? I didn't, and I haven't, and I'm now running a silver business, and the whole story of that has evolved for me. But it did get me thinking that there are a lot of warning signs out there for a lot of people about gold and silver purchasing and the effects that this stuff has. And it's not just about buying and buying and buying, it's about the culture and the mentality. And I do somewhat despise, is a strong word, but it's close to it, with some of the more unscrupulous channels out there in this world. I don't like the almost cult-driven, like anti-world, anti-government, ethos that's out there. And a lot of that can actually stem down to, essentially just this brainwashing, this echo chamber that happens. And I've talked again at length about echo chambers here on YouTube and other social media. And I always sort of think to myself, well, where does the responsibility ultimately lie? The responsibility sometimes is shifted to the individual. Oh, you need to actually think about what you're buying. And I always try and share that message whenever I'm doing a video showing beautiful things like this, going, this kilo of silver is absolutely incredible. It certainly is, but it was £400-500 more expensive than this kilo of silver. So you can see there could be a potential problem. If you wanted to sell this in a hurry, you'd get a lot less money back for it than you paid. And there is this sort of green-eyed monster that comes into the fore for a lot of this stuff. Gold and silver, of course, throughout human history has been incredibly sought after. Wars have been fought over it. Empires have been forged and lost over it as well. It's really fascinating. And things even like this Mint era Britannia here with the wonky head Britannia, definitely worth checking out my eBay listing for that, which ends tomorrow. Go and check it out. There's a link in the description box below. But it's really fascinating, I think, to see the green-eyed monster in effect sometimes when you're making your important decisions about what to buy. And I think that the responsibility... So what really inspired me was this radio broadcast. It was about a chap who had this awful gambling addiction, and he would be constantly putting money in and trying to get money out whenever he got his winnings and so on. And it was all about how the responsibility of the bookmaker did not kick in, and they let him gamble. I think they said it was nearly £250,000 across a 3 or 4 year period. And he's something like £70,000 in debt now because of this whole situation. And at no point did the retailer, did the bookies and gambling websites express, hang on, can you really afford this? Is this really the right thing for you? So where does that responsibility lie when it comes to gold and silver? Because this stuff can be just as addictive. Shopping addictions are a well-known thing. They happen, and people really do get down that rabbit hole super quick. I know I did when I got involved in my own purchasing of gold and silver, and I'm quite free to admit that I've made some pretty rash decisions. Now, the difference here is I'm very fortunate, I'm not going to lie, that we had a significant amount of savings that we were using to do this. So it wasn't the sort of day-to-day cash that we needed. If the boiler broke down, or if the car needed to have a big service, or if we needed to buy a new car because the car died, which happened, we had the other means to do it without having to take a hit on something that maybe we weren't ready to sell. So I like to think that my ethos has always been, if you can control the overall budget, not go too far in, then you can't go much far wrong with this. But that's not always true, and that's not always the case, and it's not always easy to identify how far down the rabbit hole you should be going. And I get asked a lot of times on my channel and through my emails, how much gold and silver should I be looking to buy? And ultimately, that's going to come down to everybody's individual financial circumstances. If you're a multi-millionaire, then buying £20,000 worth of gold every month isn't probably going to be too much of a hardship. But if you're just trying to stack on a small budget and you've got some savings and you want to put money into gold and silver, it's just difficult to really see how that can be justified on a large scale. So I do think that there is a responsibility, not only from sort of social media as in influencers, and whilst I really do absolutely hate that with a passion, I have to admit that I am somewhat of an influencer, and I do like to think I've been pretty transparent about my messaging throughout my time on YouTube, that most of the purchases that anybody should ever make need to be evaluated strongly against their own position. I don't think I'm going to be able to open this capsule very easily, but generally, oh no, there we go, beautiful. Let's have a look at that coin. But a bit of dust on it, isn't there? We'll have to clean that off. The point here is that the responsibility does lie on the individual, but I do think there is a responsibility from a social perspective on creators here on YouTube to not just that fear of missing out, that pumping, that dumping, that everything that happens on YouTube in the less scrupulous circles, I hate. I really do. And it somewhat makes silver out to be a little bit of a cult as well. There is this sort of ethos and mentality that, it's the only thing that you can possibly ever look to buy. Anything less than silver, or even gold even, is seen to be inferior and you're not part of the team. It's starting to feel like a cult in some circles. It really is. And this doom and gloom, end of the world, just no. Just no. Just say no. What was that Nancy Reagan's famous phrase? Just say no. And in certain ways that rings true, because there are elements of addiction that come into that, not just from the purchasing of this stuff over and over again, but the ethos, the rabbit holes that one can fall down on YouTube, on social media generally. Now, in terms of the social responsibility that come from dealers and retailers to customers, I think that's also a really interesting one. And as a retailer of premium items like hand-poured silver, I have had, and I do continue to have, conversations with customers who get in touch or asking to order a large amount of premium stuff. I think there is a responsibility just to ask the question, just to go, that's great that you want to order, a couple of £1,000 worth of poured silver or premium coins. Have you thought about what happens if you need to sell them? Because all the will in the world, like my poured silver, for example, if sold in the right circles individually, they'll sell for the same prices that I do. Otherwise I wouldn't sell them, would I? People are willing to pay the price that I charge for my work, for my craftsmanship. So that's the kind of baseline price. Some of my earlier pieces will go for way more than that. But also, in a pinch, you won't get that money back. If you take any premium item, not just my poured silver, any premium item down to a pawn shop or a gold and silver coin store, you'll probably get spot price for it. And that's the same of most premium stuff. So I always have had this trigger in my mind that if somebody does place these large orders, that they fully understand, they're in the know about this. And I think that's realistically the only responsible thing that people can do. But there's nothing of that from dealers. There's nothing to stop you going to a dealer and spending £50,000 on a 1 kilo gold bar. There's no background checks. There's no affordability checks. There's no, honest conversations of is this necessarily the right thing for you to do? And I think that's fascinating because it is akin somewhat to a bit of a gamble. Like if you're buying this stuff, it's definitely something that you can lose money on, like a gamble would do, and there is no checks and balances from that perspective. It's just can you buy it? Yep, great, here's the cash. And then, like a gambling website, it can be sometimes quite difficult to get that money out from a dealer. So if you buy a kilo gold bar from a dealer, if you're lucky enough to have that kind of cash lying around, and you buy it for, I don't know, £53,000, and you go back to that same dealer and try and sell it a week later, there's a very good chance that they'll only offer you about 47,000. It's often quite a lot under spot for those big bars. You might find some dealers offering a bit of a better price, but it's unlikely. So wherein lies the responsibility of that? Now, some would say it goes back to the individual, because if you're buying a kilo of gold, then realistically you should do your homework about what the prices would be on the entry and exit. And I would tend to agree with that. But at the same time, where does that energy come for somebody to buy a kilo of gold? Is it coming from some social media influencer? Is it coming from a biased bullion dealer's blog about the outlook on the world? Is it coming from a news media source that is perhaps over-exaggerating how things are? And I do think that happens a lot more than people think, and it can be really quite dangerous. So my advice, my top tips, has always been just take a step backwards. If it's something that you really feel confident that you can afford, that you can enjoy, that you can get that return that you're looking for out of something at the other end, whether it be in 5 years, 10 years, or 100 years for 3 generations' time, then make that decision on your own. But to the dealers out there that listen, I think we're in a unique point right now where we've got it good. Social media can let us say whatever we want, and I could tell everyone on my channel, you need to go out and buy 1,000 ounces of silver now from any dealer. And look what happened with the silver squeeze. The silver squeeze movement categorically failed. There are people who bought silver when the spot price was $29, $30 an ounce, and they were paying $45, $50 an ounce for US Eagles, thinking from all of the hype that things were going to go up. Did the dealers stop them when somebody came to buy a monster box with their life savings? No, of course not, because they want the cash, they want the premium, they were raking it in. And the silver squeeze movement categorically failed. And look where it is now. It's in the doldrums. So be careful. I think having that sense and retrospect to look back, I look back now at my own situation where I was playing some poker. It was online poker, and for context, I enjoyed a little bit of online poker every now and again, and I entered a big tournament. This is for my backyard bully ramblers listening to the back end, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on my little story here. Won't be more than a minute or two, don't worry. I entered a little online tournament. It was like 1,000 people, £10 entry, not a lot to gamble with. It's fine, it's good. Gives me a bit of entertainment for a day when I was bored. And I ended up doing really well, came second in that competition, and I earned nearly £2,500. I think it was like 2,396 or something like that in winnings. Brilliant, amazing, right? Well, it was great, but I was in that zone, so I jumped onto a cash table online with that amount of cash, and very quickly, within about 15 minutes, I'd nearly doubled that amount of money, and I was sitting on that table with close to £5,000 in cash. And I was like, well, this is going well. Let's keep going. Let's go. I'm on a roll. I'm on a hot streak. And in the space of 3 hands, I lost close to £3,000. So I got scared. I cashed out the remaining money. It was great. But there were other times that I came back to the site and I put larger sums down on cash. Overall, I came out probably about even in a week, but I got super scared. So I was like, well, that's it. I'm done. I'd got that fix, and I get where the addiction comes from, because I was in that zone addicted, but I somehow had a moment click in my mind where I was like, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't make a difference. Like, what am I going to do if I take 5,000 onto this table and I double it? Is that going to make me retire at 24? Well, I think I was, something like that. No, of course it's not. Of course it's not. So it lost interest to me. It just lost meaning to me. And I feel like that's the same thing with like my purchasing of gold and silver. Is it going to make me a millionaire? No. Is it going to keep the wealth that I've got safe? Yes. So is it a gamble? To a degree. It's got a golden and silver lining. Ultimately, that's where that phrase comes from. So anyway, that's my little story for you ramblers listening to the end of my video. I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this. Please do feel free to share them down in that comment section. If you're watching to this point and you don't know what a rambler is, then you do now, because you're cool. And you should subscribe if you're not, because quite honestly, what you're doing here if you're not. Otherwise, we'll see you on the next one next week. Have a great weekend, what's left of it, wherever you are, and week ahead. We'll see you next time. As always, please make sure that you like, share, comment, and subscribe for more.